If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who drive overnight, truckers, backroad drivers, etc., have you ever experienced or seen something on the roads that was not from this world? Lost time, abductions, glitches, weird creatures, etc. I got to see the black dog. I had been running a long week and long hours in an industry very similar to truck driving but less regulated. I can't say how many hours I had been driving that day, but the people talking on the radio had stopped making sense. They had faded into a white noise, along with the ever-present whistle of wind and turbo. I had stopped babbling to stay occupied. I was driving as a robot and not fully aware of where I was on the familiar mountain route. The beast was beside the truck and was the size of a car in the shoulder lane. It was keeping pace at 70 miles per hour, but the legs moved slower. It was like a shadow and had form, but when you looked, it disappeared. It existed only in my peripherals. The black dog is said to be an omen of death, and they aren't wrong. I wasn't falling asleep, the energy shooters were making sure of that, but my brain was entirely shutting down. It's something buried in your subconscious that can only be accessed in your deepest primordial lizard brain. At first, it was confusing but not scary, though I should have been scared. I should have slept but chose to continue on and end my week in bed. I could have died or killed a van full of nuns and orphans coming back from free puppy day at the shelter. I chose to keep trucking, and that choice made me the monstrous demon in the night. So I work at a hospital that is 65 kilometers away from my home, and I usually work the 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. shifts. My hospital is located just outside a small town. This town is connected to my city via a road with trees on both sides and in the median as well. So, coming to the story, I got in my car, turned the radio on, and drove off from the parking lot of the hospital. I was really tired and sleep deprived, but I managed to keep my eyes open during the drive. 10 minutes into the drive, suddenly the road gets really dark. I look in the back mirror, and I see nothing, total darkness. Now I'm driving at around 60 kilometers per hour, and as I move my gaze from the rear view mirror to the road in front of me, I see a guy walking like a zombie near the median. Upon getting closer, I noticed he had a huge mouth, which was wide open, and no other facial features, just the open mouth, no eyes, nose, or ears. I've seen worse things than this faceless guy, as I work in the trauma department, but there was something so off about it that I floored my car and noped the duck out of there. Now I was driving at around 130 kilometers per hour, scared with my heart racing, when suddenly I saw a dog running in front of my car. WTF. The roads are empty, no lights or whatever, no bloody cars or headlights, and there's this shadowy dog running in front of my car at 130 km/h. At this point, I'm genuinely scared shitless, as I started praying and tried not to look at that thing. This continued for a solid few minutes before it disappeared. I'm still confused. What was it? Was I hallucinating? Should I have stopped the car and checked with that faceless man? I'm still baffled by what has happened. I came here to find the answer, or maybe some other fellows who had the chance to face the faceless man. I have experienced a disappearing road. We took an accidental detour when coming back from the mountains super late at night and nearly ran out of gas on this long and empty road, which we couldn't find on the map. This happened a while back and we were using a map book. We found a gas station, but they were out of gas. They were standoffish, but they told us the name of the road and nearby town, but we still couldn't find it. In a total deus ex machina, some local dirt bike riders gave us a jerry can, and we followed the road until it unexpectedly ended near a large truck stop that we were familiar with. We were shaken and nicknamed the place Mount Black Hole. A year or two later my dad was determined to solve the mystery of the black hole. After online searching the town and road relentlessly and not being able to find them, which he decided was an issue of spelling, he and his friend went on a road trip. They took his friend's new car with inbuilt GPS, printed out directions online, and used an old map book in case the road had changed names. They couldn't find the road entrance next to the family truck stop, nor could they find the road from its top end near the mountains. They drove all through the night and didn't get back until around 3 a.m. after exploring a number of small towns, all of which were on the maps, but never found the black hole or got any closer to solving the mystery of where they went that night. They even recorded their route with the GPS and showed us later that they had been to pretty much every town in that area and taken every road that led off from the truck stop, but no road and no town. I was out with my friends working on a project. Around 12 p.m. it was done, so I decided to go home. I live in a provincial area, BTW. The ride home was fine until I reached this certain part of the road where the left side's view is just the open sky, mountains surrounding the town, and a view of the sea. Staring at the blue sky, I saw a man hovering in thin air. He wasn't flying or anything. Just that creepy exorcist position where the person is lifted in the air and their body is stiff. I didn't get my eyes off it. I thought maybe it was just my eyes seeing things that weren't there and waiting until my eye focused and it'd just be something I made a different image in my mind, but it didn't. It was still a man hovering in thin air. When the trunk of a tall tree covered my view, it was gone. I still don't know how to explain it. I don't know if it was a ghost of some sort or whatever, but I know what I saw. I've never hallucinated, so it creeps me out even more. A few years ago, myself and my family were driving on a dark stretch of road that had quarries on either side of the road. This road, in fact, is basically a long series of bridges that go over old quarries. The road is peppered with driveways here and there on each end. The quarries are like fingers. Out of the blue, a young boy, maybe 3 to 5 years old, went running into the road. My husband was driving, and I was on the passenger side. We both put our brakes on instantly. My husband hit the brakes on the car. I hit my air brakes, lol. As soon as we hit the brakes, the boy dissipated into thin air. The boy was a bright white shadow at first, and then the shadow got slowly darker until it completely disappeared. My husband and I looked at each other, and we were like, WTF? We were in total disbelief, and we were terrified. Our kids, in the back seat, wanted to know why my husband slammed on the brakes and why we were just sitting there. To be honest, I don't remember what we told them. Me and my husband were in silence the rest of the way home. We talked about it a couple of weeks later and decided that it must have been car exhaust that somehow formed into the shape of a small human child. We had passed a car, waiting to turn onto the road we were on, a couple 100 feet before. We were grasping at straws for something, anything, to neatly explain what we witnessed. We didn't really talk about it until I heard about a family on that same road, driving off one of the sides of the road into the quarry. This had happened in the 50s and 60s. The entire family drowned. It was winter and night when they went off the road and into the quarry. It turns out we saw the boy right in front of his old house. His family was on the final stretch on that road, to their home, when they died. If that's not creepy enough, a 6-year-old boy was the only one not found. Both me and my husband knew nothing about this family, their tragic ending, or their home until after I read old newspaper clippings about the crash after our run-in. Just a little creepy. This was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it still creeps me out just thinking about it. I was in the car with my mom, heading home from a museum we had been to multiple times before, so obviously the road we took should have been familiar, but maybe 20 minutes into the drive, we both realized we're completely lost on some back road neither of us had ever seen before. We pull up maps to get back on the road, and it starts navigating us. Maybe another 10 minutes later and the road has become a narrow dirt path in the woods, but map is still telling us to go this way, so whatever. All of a sudden, this narrow dirt path opens up into a brand new paved road, the woods open up into a massive field, and we're right in the middle of a shiny new suburban area. There was a sign on the side of the road, but it was completely blank. The GPS told us to drive through this suburb, so we did, and it was empty. No cars, no people, it was daytime, but there wasn't a single light on in any window, which felt odd. Everything looked brand new, but there was no construction or road equipment anywhere, and there were no stores, gas stations, or anything else except for what looked like a McDonald's with no branding. We kept going for 10 minutes or so, and the road turned back into dirt, and it went right back into the woods, and maybe 5 minutes later we were back in our normal town. Now this could have easily been some weird testing area, but there were no trespassing signs, it wasn't fenced off, there was no one guarding it, there was no evidence of anyone staying there, etc. It was just empty. The whole time, I felt like I just shouldn't be there, it was just wrong. Looking at that area on maps still only shows the woods, and that field would have definitely been visible by a satellite. A few weeks ago, my wife and I were driving a show, and not knowing how to get there, we used the GPS. The GPS took us through a winding, narrow, and heavily wooded road. I didn't think anything of it, even given that it was all residential and had no street lights whatsoever. The road is a two-way street but is ridiculously narrow, and if oncoming traffic approaches, you probably have to pull over and let them pass. There were very few houses on this road, and most were pretty hidden. As we drove down this road, we were initially the only ones on the road. About a minute later, I see a big semi-truck in the distance behind me. Its headlights helped illuminate the otherwise nearly pitch-black road. As we drove on this road, I noticed the truck getting closer and closer to me. As it got closer, I started to get really nervous because the road was very windy and narrow, and I almost felt like this truck was going to hit me. I kept checking my rearview mirror to make sure the truck wasn't going to hit me, and at one point, The truck was probably 10 feet behind me. Then it literally just disappeared. There were a few driveways on the road, but there was no way I wouldn't have seen a truck that big pull into a driveway. The driveways were all narrow, as was the road, and I kept checking my rearview mirror every few seconds to see how far the truck was behind me. The light from the headlights instantly disappeared when the truck did too. There were also no other roads that branched off of this road, so this truck literally had nowhere to go. My wife's friend said that road is apparently haunted. I don't know whether it's true or not. But it was super creepy. I've never had that experience before. I was relieved when I finally reached the end of that road after about 10 minutes. A very long, 10-minute winding, secluded drive. One night a few years ago, I was driving, and my little sister was in the passenger seat. We had just left my older sister's house to go home and relax for the night, as it was getting late. From my recollection, it was around 11 p.m. or later. I always take a dark back road back home, as it's the fastest way. I remember in the car we were joking and just listening to music, and I then felt a heavy, eerie feeling in the atmosphere out of nowhere. As I felt that I saw in my headlights what looked like a small cat running from the left to the right. By the time it got to the center of the road, it looked like a dog, then it ran all the way to the right side, and I promise you, I've never seen a lion, cheetah, or wild cat in person, but this is the closest thing to it. It was big, furry, and super muscular. One thing to note is that we did not see this thing quickly morph into different creatures. The feeling of it changing was so smooth that I cannot even explain it clearly. It went from being something so small to a massive creature right in front of my eyes. It was extra unsettling the way it galloped and looked at us. After seeing this, my sister is so scared at this point, and so am I, but the creature is running along beside our car. At this point, looking into the car, I was at least going 35 miles per hour, but this thing kept up with the car. And I know for a fact we both saw this thing change into a creature or something because, as it was changing, I recall my sister saying, "Aw, don't hit that little thing." To make sense of the sizes it changed to, I would say it went from a rabbit size, then to a house cat, then to a German Shepherd dog, then to whatever in hell the last thing it changed into was, but it was honestly like a good 5 to 6 feet tall running on all fours with a length of, say, about 5 to 5.5 feet. This has happened to myself and several friends over the past years. We have never been quite sure of what was going on, but on several occasions, we have lost many hours of time while traveling around the state. Sometimes it was just myself or one of my friends who was in the car with me. One of the most memorable occurrences of this is from about 7 years ago. It has stuck with me since and has freaked me out. At this time, I was still living in Flint, Michigan, with my parents. It was about a year before I moved to Grand Haven. My friend and I were headed up to the Beulah/Frankfurt area to camp. The trip should have been 3 to 3.5 hours, and we have made this trip many times before. We would head up there several times each year, and my family spent every summer up there in my childhood since we had a lake house on Platte Lake. My friend and I left home at 3 a.m. so we could get some early morning fly fishing in when we arrived. Somewhere around 2/3 of the way through the trip, we were on M115 just north of Cadillac. Everything started seeming unnaturally calm out on the road. The road is in the middle of a national forest, so things are calm as is. This was a very eerie calm. We did not notice anything else. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, and the sky was starting to get light. Eventually, daylight filled the land. The next thing we both knew was that we were coming up to the US 31 intersection in Benzonia. I glanced at the clock, and it said it was 12:30 p.m. My friend noticed this as well. Thinking that my radio was wrong, I checked the cell phone, and it too said 12:30 p.m., as did the sign at a bank. My friend and I found ourselves very confused. It is hard to explain the feeling. It was like, WTF? We should have arrived in town around 6 to 6:30 a.m., but instead we arrived 6 hours later than expected. We were not tired during the trip. I got lots of sleep the day before, and I drive over 120,000 miles a year, so I am used to long-distance trips. We were also both totally familiar with the route. The gas tank in the vehicle was still fairly full, and it would have been empty if we randomly drove around in a daze the whole time. We checked our credit card statements later that month, and there were no gas purchases during the lost time. The mileage on the truck seemed normal for that trip. The strange thing is that the time loss was so seamless. We have no recollection of the lost time or stopping. We were doing about 60 miles per hour the whole way. To us, the trip seemed like a normal amount of time for that drive, but the clock said differently. It was just a total mind duck. It has happened several more times over the years, to lesser extents. Anyone have any clues into what happened? The first time this happened was about a year or two ago. My dad and I were driving home from someplace, I can't remember where, but that doesn't matter. We had just gone around a roundabout and were passing under a street lamp. It was pretty late, so it was dark outside, and all the lights in the car were off, but we had the brightest headlights on because of the darkness and empty roads. Right after we passed the street lamp, everything went dark. I was pitch black and couldn't see anything, even if it was an inch from my eyes, meaning that the headlights and street lamp would have had to have gone out at the exact same time, but I very highly doubt that. A second later, everything was back to normal. I looked at my dad in confusion, and he looked confused as well. I asked what happened, and he had no idea. The second and most recent time this happened was, like, a month ago. This time, we were driving to pick something up, and it was pretty bright out, but the sun had begun to set. Headlights were on, of course, but the lights in the car were off. We were driving on the highway with other cars around. A flash of darkness just flew over the car, just pitch black. I couldn't see anything, it was like being blind. For many years, I have been haunted by something I saw in the backcountry of Wisconsin. It was early spring, and I was headed down a dark country road around 8 p.m. south of Barron, Wisconsin. Surrounded by trees, I drove over a hill, and then a little ways down the other side, I saw the reflection of green eyes near my driver's side window, about 4 feet high. I was confused because they were right by my window, and I didn't see anything in the road ahead of me a second earlier. It was like it was trying to be invisible and had appeared just a moment too soon. I drove a little further and decided to turn around to see if my eye played a trick on me or, if it was indeed, an animal of some kind. As I approached, my mind whirled because my brain could see an animal there, but then an overwhelming sense of fear overcame me when I could not assign a known animal to it. I pulled up to it, now about 20 feet or so from it. I was horrified by this time and knew in my heart that I could not take my lights off it or I would die, or so my gut told me. In front of me stood a creature that was on 4 feet, but approximately 5 to 6 feet tall to the top of its head. It had the head of something like a cat and the muscular body of a dog, but was the size of a cow and very lean. It had cat-like ears but a short snout, but overall, it was definitely not a cat. It had cocoa brown fur with dark brown zebra-like stripes running down its sides. It also had a dark brown mane running down its back. Its green eyes were in front of its head. Out of fear, I flashed my headlights at it and then honked my horn, hoping it would run off. It only looked as if I infuriated it as it brought its head down to the ground, keeping its eyes on me as if it were threatened. Several times, the thought crossed my mind that it was, in fact, strong and big enough to bash the windscreen, rip me out of the car, and eat me alive. I knew it wasn't going to be the one to back down after flashing my lights and honking at it, so I decided to keep my lights on it and back down the road in reverse. I did just that, as it intensely stared at me as I reversed about a quarter mile, then did a wide turn in the road and peeled out of there. Nobody has before or since mentioned this creature anywhere I have read. As far as animals go, it was way too big to be a deer and too lean and muscular for a deer as well. It had cat-like features but was much too tall to be a large cat of any kind. It was way too tall to be any kind of dog. Definitely not a cow like I've ever seen. I lived and hunted in that area for many years, so I was very in tune with the animals native to the area. I sure hope someday I find someone else who has experienced this demon-like animal. This story comes from my mom and 2 younger brothers, right about a year ago. I live in a village within a huge forest that has pockets here and there of other villages. Meaning if you want to go to another village, then you have to go through the forest. Poland is like 1/3 forest, so it's quite common. I'm just trying to give you a picture of the environment. So, basically, my mom told me that she was driving with my 2 brothers at around midnight to our neighboring village. While driving through the forest, she and my siblings saw something in the middle of the road. She proceeded to slow down to a near stop and put the big lights on. They told me that they were in a state of freezing shock when they saw it. She said that even with the light, she couldn't really see details, as if it were kind of hazy. They described it as being extremely tall, twice the size of my dad, who is 1.9 meters, and very skinny with arms and legs being disproportionately long. They said that it had some sort of dark brown or black clothing on with no shoes but big feet. No shining eyes like you would have from animals. Dark brown skin or hair. They said that it took 2 steps from the middle of the road, and it vanished into the forest. It's a shitty paved road with a width of about 2 cars, and it's about 2 to 3 meters deep, with a 2 to 2 meter ditch on both sides, and less than a meter before the thick forest starts. After disappearing, my mom asked people in the village if they saw something in the forest, but they said they hadn't. A few days later had passed, and the news had traveled to other villages that my mom saw something crazy, But she got a call from a horse breeder from the neighboring village. He lives at the tree line of the forest, and he said that when he needs to go to another village on horseback, the horses just stop at the forest entrance and refuse to enter. My mom isn't the believer type for this kind of SHT, but after what she saw, she opened her mind. Not long before the sighting, people started to cut pieces of the forest. It could be a Lezzi, Slavic forest protector being. It is said it can take any form and change size and height, but I have no idea. If you know anything, please comment. When I was 24, living in Tucson, Arizona, I had something unexplainable happen. I was working on construction in Arizona. It was fall, and it was about 70 degrees at night. My buddy and I had just gotten done working on a multi-family development outside Yuma, on the way to Tucson. We parked the pickup off a dirt road, on a ridge overlooking the desert floor. We had to be about 15 minutes from Interstate 8. We both cracked a beer, don't drink and drive kids, and watched for the imminent and beautiful Arizona sunset. All of a sudden, about 2 to 4 miles in the distance, I saw a cylindrical structure, maybe a vehicle, appear on the desert floor. We both saw this and didn't say much aside from what the FCK is that? The thing is, imagine a giant bullet sitting upright, illuminated with a very bright light. A spiral walkway appeared and ran down the object from the top. We began to see numerous small outlines walking down the ramp, which I assumed to be humans. We were both speechless. It happened so fast. Only about 45 to 60 seconds had passed. Staring at these figures walking down the ramp, they all stopped abruptly and disappeared. This is the last thing we both remember. What I can only describe as similar to getting knocked out in a fight is that I just ceased being conscious. I awoke at about 6:30 in the morning, sitting in my car with my buddy and shotgun, 90 miles away in Tucson, a block from my driveway. We both never talk about it because no one would believe my story. But that was the only thing that has happened in my life that I can't explain, and that has led me to be much more open-minded. This actually happened to my dad when I was about 11 or so. I could tell when he told me this the day after it happened that he was genuinely scared. Before my dad retired, he worked all over the Midwest doing highway construction. He would be gone for 1 to 2 weeks at a time most of the summer, working from sunup to sundown. One night, he was on his way home in the middle of the night. He was probably 40 miles from home, out in the middle of nowhere, when he heard a knocking sound on the rear passenger truck door. He was instantly caught off guard and wondered if he should stop to get out and see what it was. He also thought about rolling his window down to see if he could figure out what made the sound. Something didn't feel right, so he decided to just keep driving. There was a town coming up soon anyway, so if it happened again, he could check in the light. He got into town, and the knocking had stopped. Somewhat relieved and getting closer to home, he decided to press on. As soon as he was out of the lights of the town, the knocking started again. This time, he was terrified. It literally sounded like knuckles, knocking steadily on the back door. It happened a few more times until he reached the lights of his hometown. The next day, he told my mom and me. We all went out to inspect his truck, which was covered in dirt from the construction. Only on the back door, where the knocking came from, were what looked like knuckle marks. He knocked on the truck, and it left nearly identical marks. Not long after that, we were speaking with a medicine man, we are Anishinaabe, and my dad told him what happened. He told us that it was good that he didn't get out or roll down his window, or whatever it was would have gotten closer. These things don't have good intentions, and they will try to trick you. I'm glad that my father was aware enough to recognize that it was something negative. If you hear knocking while driving, just ignore it and keep moving. 5 years ago, I was driving to work bright and early in the morning, and the SUV next to me was in a right turn only lane, and I was in the straight lane while we were waiting for the light to change. I didn't think much of it or look at the SUV or driver until the light changed, and they also tried going straight. At that point, I looked over, as they were basically trying to run me off the road to go straight and veer into me. I was going to honk, but then the middle-aged lady that was driving jerked her head to the side, looked right at me, and her whole face morphed into a terrifying face. I don't even know how to describe it. It elongated and looked awful and terrifying. Like that Scream painting by Edward Munch. But way more terrifying. It's like she decided to show me what she really is, and it changed in a flash. I slammed on my brakes, or it, cut in front of me, and I ended up taking the very next right turn just to get away from her, and I parked on the side of the road to catch my breath. I don't do drugs, I sometimes have a couple of beers after work, but nothing crazy. I've never seen anything like this before or after, and I've been too scared to mention it to anyone but my husband for fear of being called a crazy person. I saw her face change right before my eyes, and I am to this day absolutely certain of what I saw. The feeling that came over me was just absolute terror, and the look she gave me was certainly menacing. Has anyone else ever experienced anything like that? This happened in 2006. During this year, I had a lot of strange encounters that seemed to stop after 2007. We were on a visit to a church in town. The church is located in an area that has lots of vegetation and grassland, even though it is located at the threshold of a busy city with a noisy main road just outside. The church cannot be seen from the main road outside, and people have to drive or walk in through a small winding road before they reach the church. It takes around 15 minutes to walk back onto the main road. I was walking with a group of 5 friends when we reached an area with lots of thick vegetation. I could not explain it, but it seems my eyes had been magnetically drawn to a cluster of low, thick bushes beside the road. Then suddenly I had a flash of vision in my head. I had it a lot in 2006, from the perspective of the bush, and saw myself and friends walking away from the church. It was like shaky, low-res videocam footage, jumpy, and grainy. I had the vision for like 5 seconds before I felt like I'm looking through my eyes in my own body again. My eyes were still attracted to the bush, and I was finally able to break free after a good 10 or more seconds. Then the weirdness starts. We are now on the main road. I heard a rasping roar, sounds like a cross between hiss and roar, behind me. I was startled, turned around, and saw nothing there. A few steps later, the same sound got louder and sounded closer. I looked around, and there was nothing. I turned back forward and roared. It was right in front of me, where my friends were walking. Boom, I had a vision of a mysterious creature that suddenly shot straight up in the sky and vanished. And guess what? Yeah, when I asked my friends, no one else had heard it. This is not the first time hearing weird, dismembered sounds. So I don't know if this is a glitch or what, but it's happened about 4 or 5 times now. I am a waitress, and sometimes I work the night shift. I usually get done with work around 11:30ish. To get back home, I always take the same route, which consists of this long, straight road. The past few times I have driven home, I have seen a rabbit running away from the road on the right side, roughly in the same spot every time. After the second or third time it happened, I thought it was kind of weird, but I shook it off as a coincidence. Then it happened again. I was like, WTF, okay, now this is kind of strange? So the last time I was driving home, I was thinking about this rabbit running away from the road and kind of searching for it. I almost gave up until I saw it again. Same exact thing. This only happens at night, when it's almost midnight. Maybe it's just a creature of habit or a constant glitch. Let me know what you think. Around 4 or 5 years ago, my friend Jay and I were cruising down a back road outside of the small town we grew up in. This particular road was affectionately named the Designated Smoking Road, DSR, by us, so as you can imagine, we were pretty toasted on this trip. Anyway, we have driven on this road many times but have never seen anything like this. Towards the end of the road, we noticed an animal in the opposite lane, with a truck driving behind it. This animal was around the size of an average cat, and my first thought was that the animal was going to be run over. But as we got closer, we noticed that this animal was running in our direction, and it seemed to have characteristics of both a cat and a dog, so we weren't really sure what kind of animal it was. But the strangest thing about it was the animal's movement. Its legs seemed to move in a pendulum-like motion, left to right rather than front to back. And this vehicle just continued to follow this creature for as long as we could see it. I was driving, and I think I got a better look at it than Jay did. I didn't say anything to him about the animal's legs, but that was the first thing he mentioned when I asked what the hell was up with that, so I wasn't the only one who saw legs swinging side to side. I've always wondered what that thing really was. I can't even remember the details of what it looked like, but I definitely remember being freaked out by it and the conversation that followed. About 25 years ago, when I was 30, I worked at a machine shop as a tool maker in Tacoma, Washington. Often, I ran errands up to nearby Auburn and Kent to various suppliers or outside specialty shops, etc. Typically, this would take about 2 hours to accomplish. On this particular day, I was delayed in traffic and otherwise slowed down, but it still felt as though I was having a pretty good time. I ate lunch on the road and eventually made my way back to the shop. I'd been listening to the radio and not paying attention to the digital readout of my car stereo. When I got back, my boss said, "Wow, that was fast. Did you get everything done?" And I showed him that I had, but we then both noted I'd only been gone 45 minutes. This was completely impossible. The driving alone would have taken twice that long, not to mention the time I'd spent at the various locations. He, his girlfriend, and another guy that worked there were all completely perplexed. That is my story, and I'm sticking with it. This is the first time I've spoken about it since. This was in late November or early December of 2012, and I was doing an install in a winery in Northern California. It was a long day because we were working out of town, so we worked late to get it finished in one day. I started driving home around midnight and had about a 3-hour drive back home to Oakland. It was about 1:30 a.m., and I was outside of Stockton, and I saw this girl standing on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. She was wearing a white dress that ended about 3 inches above her knees, and she was barefooted. She had long black hair flowing down her shoulders, and she was just standing still like a statue. I looked at her as I drove by, but she didn't move, didn't acknowledge my loud truck as it passed, or anything. I was pretty freaked out because you always hear stories like this and then she appears in your vehicle with you, but that wasn't the case. She just stood there in the night. The thing that was most weird to me was that it was cold that night, about low 40s, and it was drizzling a bit, and she was wearing a short dress and no shoes standing on the asphalt. If this was just some girl who does this for fun to freak people out, I feel like she would have been extremely cold and would be shivering, but this girl didn't move. Now that I got home, I was still thinking about it, so I searched Ghost Girl outside of Stockton, California, and I found a bunch of articles and stories about the East 8 Mile Road Ghost Girl, and most of the descriptions fit what I saw to a T. I never went back to that area because I moved to another state shortly after, but I want to travel back there and see what I can find one day. Has anyone else seen this girl in that area? Or has anyone else seen a ghost girl in general on the side of the road like this? Any information would be helpful. So my friend and I were driving back from the fair last week. 8 at night in October, so it's close to completely dark. My friend lives out in the country, the type where your next door neighbor is half a mile away, and I'm dropping him off. We're on this long, narrow, maybe 1.5 car width, dirt road that's built like a ditch with sloped dirt walls on both sides. Almost 3 miles down this road, when we go over a small hill, we see a car in front of us, parked to the side but still blocking the road. His hazard lights turned on as soon as our headlights hit the car. We could see the car for a few seconds before our headlights hit it, and the hazards definitely weren't on. Then the guy gets out of the driver's side with a black hoodie covering his upper body and face and a lit flashlight and starts power walking towards our car in a creepy manner. We both freaked, and I quickly reversed back over the hill, but it wasn't wide enough for me to make a 3-point turn completely around. I figured I'd be okay if I was able to squeeze past the parked car quickly enough if I dodged the guy. I drive back over the hill, and the dude and his car are gone. He was out of my sight for maybe 15 seconds. This road goes on for a few miles in a straight line, and I can see almost to where the dirt road ends. The guy just disappeared. No taillights in the distance, no flashlight, nothing. For a normal person to pull that off, they'd need to run 30 feet back to their car, start it, then drive past 500 feet in 15 seconds. Not possible. I don't know what we saw, but it was not human. I wish I had a dash cam so I could have caught it all on tape. So, I live in rural Arkansas. When I lived with my parents, I had a night shift job at a factory. Sometimes, I'd leave early, and I'd be driving home at 1 a.m., or sometime a little bit later. Oftentimes, I would see what seemed to be shapes ducking out of the way of my headlights, as if the light would harm them. I always assumed it was in my head and that the people were just my headlights casting weird shadows. Well, one night, a coworker, maybe 20 years older than me, who had grown up on a reservation, was talking about weird things we'd seen. He looks at me and asks, "So, you live in town name. Have you ever seen the shadow people at night?" I swear, my blood ran cold, and I froze. He assured me that he'd seen them too. Then he told me that his grandmother, a full-blooded Native American, had warned him as a kid to never stop and investigate. They were dark spirits and angry ones. The last time I saw the shadow people was probably 5 years ago. I moved out of my parents' house and into the town I worked in. Well, about a year ago, my wife and I bought a house in the boonies. I work a different job, but I get off work anywhere between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. I assumed that I'd begin seeing the shadows again living out here, but strangely, I never have, though my new little town has a history involving violent rebellion of some sort, and I have seen a few strange fog/misty figures. The closest thing I've seen since we moved here came a few weeks after a car accident took the lives of 2 men. I came up with that accident just a couple of minutes after it happened, and I'll never get the sight of one of the men out of my head. Sometimes, as I come up on that particular area, I see a dark spot floating in the air, right above where his body was. As for the small town my parents live in, now just my mom, the town used to be a plantation town. There's even an old cemetery on a hill with a large rock marking it. It has an arch with the word Slave Cemetery on it. Maybe the shadow people have something to do with that. One night we were driving around Germantown, Wisconsin, around 10:30 to 11 p.m., and we decided to drive out to Witch Road, actually Callan Road. The story that everyone tells is that a witch lived in one of the now fallen houses, and you can see both the witch and the girl she was trying to capture in the shadows of the trees. The closest to the correct story I ever read is that it was a murder-suicide in that home. Anyways, we drove out to Helenville to go down the road, and maybe 30 feet into the road, something hit the top of my truck incredibly hard enough for the antenna to hit the A-pillar of the truck. Now, something to note is that I was driving a Ford Ranger, so it's not something crazy tall, and there weren't any low-hanging branches or damage to the outside of the truck. All the while going down the road, both of us felt very uneasy and unwelcome. Further into the road, we started seeing small, pure white specks of light along the side of the road. My friend tried to dismiss them as fireflies, but they emit a yellow glow, not white. Aside from the lights and something hitting the roof of my truck, nothing happened, but I had a horrible, uneasy feeling of being watched the whole way home. Has anyone else gone down this road and experienced the same thing? So this happened a few years ago at around 9 to 10 p.m. on a Northern California street in a forested area. My older sister was driving her friend back to her house, and I tagged along, wanting to get some fast food on the way there. Her friend sat up front with her in the passenger seat, and I sat in the back. We were cruising up a hill, and everything seemed totally normal. I was just watching videos on my phone, and she and her friend were talking while listening to the radio. Anyway, we were making our way up this large hill when I heard them say, "What the duck?" And then they both screamed and floored it. I had no idea what happened. When I asked what happened, they were talking all nervously, and her friend sounded like she was about to start crying. I asked again, and my sister said, "You didn't see it?" I said, "No, I was looking at my phone." "What happened?" She said, "We just saw something cross the street." I started getting scared because they sounded terrified, and her voice was quivering. I had never heard her speak like that. When she finally calmed down a little bit, she told me what they saw. Still sounding anxious, she said, "We just saw a black chest fly across the street." I was puzzled and asked, "What?" She said that she thought it was a garbage bag that was getting blown by the wind, but when the headlights hit it, she saw a pitch black chest and arms hover across the street with the arms swinging in a sprinting motion, but it had no legs or head. I asked if it was a bird, but she and her friend seemed certain that it wasn't. They said the arms were swinging, not flapping. She said, it wasn't a bird, it was a black chest and arms without legs, and her friend was saying it was a demon. When we got to her friend's house, she wouldn't get out of the car unless we all did. We all stepped out and ran with her to the door, and once she got in her house, me and my sister hopped in the car and got the hell out of there. To this day, she still gets nervous when trying to explain it to anyone. A few years ago, my grandpa passed away. He wasn't a very big believer in ghosts or anything regarding the paranormal until he was in his older years. Well, I end up inheriting his '86 T-Bird. Here comes the strange part. There was lots of history in the car between myself and my grandpa. Anyway, a few months after he passed away, I'm driving the car to work, listening to music, and just processing the fact that he's truly gone. The car is all I have left, or so I thought. I drive towards one of my work sites, and out of nowhere I get a blast of the cologne he always wore, Givenchy. It was his favorite cologne to use whenever we were going out anywhere. I pull up to my work site and park the car. I can smell the cologne so strongly in the passenger seat, and I'm staring at it like, there's no cologne in here, but why does it smell like Grandpa's? It took me a solid 2 minutes to figure out that his spirit was in the car with me. His spirit had taken a ride with me to work that entire day. The cologne scent didn't dissipate one bit. It was honestly reassuring to me that he was still there in some way. So yeah, interesting encounter for me because of the fact that when he was alive, he was not a strong believer in the afterlife. Well, he proved himself wrong because he still hangs around me when something's wrong. I went out for a drive today into the forest. The area used to be an old logging town, so much of the forest is regrowth. I parked my car and walked around for a bit. I felt watched, but I'm used to that feeling in the forest. I heard a loud rustling in the bushes and assumed it was just a roo. As I was about to leave the car, I gazed out into the trees and started apologizing to the forest out loud on behalf of the people who cut down the old growth trees and destroyed the old ecosystem. I felt the need to do this out of nowhere. Then, once I had expressed my sorrow, I sort of came over and made eye contact with something about 50 meters away. We have grass trees that grow taller than any man, and when they die off, they give off the appearance of an extremely hairy person if you see them out of the corner of your eye or from a distance. It looked almost like one of those, only it had definite shapes of legs and arms and 2 black eyes. I stared into its eyes for a while. I wasn't fearful, I was quite calm, actually. It felt like we were both just acknowledging each other's presence. Then I drove away and did not look back. Feral man. Far out in the country, almost in the middle of nowhere. There was no cell service once you got so far out. We were 19 at the time. Sometimes we'd check out supposedly haunted locations, but this was not one of those nights. Nothing ever happened those nights anyway. That night was just a regular let's drive around the boonies kind of night. It was fall. Around 2 a.m. We decide to go down this particularly small, easily missed road that we've been to multiple times both day and night. It goes down and into the middle of the woods, and at the end is actually a freshly paved parking lot and a more modern built small church. It's kind of odd because it's just like why? There's no creep factor at all to the church itself, there are no dumb local stories, it's just a church, and the country people used it. Before you get to the lot, there's a spring and the shortest concrete bridge ever that you drive over. Our idea was to park the car and chill on the bridge. However, when we came around the bend and the bridge was immediately in sight, a large, tall man was standing dead center of it. The dude was disheveled, had no shoes, was dirty, and had tattered overalls on. Think mountainous, feral hillbilly, and you've got it. The last thing we expected to see was all the way out there, at 2 a.m. scare the duck out of us. This guy's reaction was to jump down and scramble up underneath the ducking bridge. There was nowhere to turn around before the bridge, so we had to speed over it into the lot and speed out of there. There's nothing paranormal to this story, and it's probably just some weird-ass mountain hillbilly, but goddamn if that's not the most unsettling thing to see in the middle of nowhere with no cell service. 2. Mothman. Once again. We were out driving around late at night, listening to music very loudly on backcountry roads. It was either summer or early fall, and we were 19. It was just the two of us. Kay was driving his car, and I was using the OSHT bars to essentially hang my upper body from the mid-thigh out of the window, being stupid. That's when, out of my peripheral vision, I saw a large black mass come out of the top of the tree line. Before I even knew what happened, it was on me, and something hit me in the head. I instinctively threw myself back into the car while simultaneously Kay started screaming and slammed on his brakes. We came to a stop in the middle of the road, and I looked over, and he was just crying, and we both realized what had happened. A large, great horned owl swooped down, slapped me across the face, and flew directly in front of his windscreen, obscuring the whole thing. He thought it was Mothman in his panic. I have never laughed so hard in my life. Some 20-odd years ago, I reconnected with a family member. Said family lived way up in the hills of North Carolina and had given me directions to his house. I was driving my vehicle, and my sister was in hers, following behind. We each had CB radios, so we could communicate along the way. We're driving, and I took what I thought was the correct road, and the dirt road immediately climbed at a very steep incline. We slowly make our way up and around this road, and it comes to a dead end. At the dead end was an old, run-down house with a huge front porch. On the porch were a plethora of things, such as an old ironing board leaning against the window, crates of soda pop bottles, a few feed bags, etc. An older gentleman was sitting in a rocker, and he had a long rifle sitting across his lap. To his left was, I assumed, his wife, and she had one of those old-timey wash tubs at her feet, and she was washing clothes. Then there were several barefoot and no-shirt kids running around. Well, they had stopped when we pulled up to the house. And there were, of course, several hound dogs laying around. Every one of them just stopped and stared at us. I slowly rolled my window down and said, very politely, "Excuse me, sir, I think we took a wrong turn." He was slowly rocking in his chair, both hands on the rifle, and just said one, drawn-out word. "Yep." I picked up the CB mic and told my sister, back up now. Back up." And we backed all the way back down to the highway. It's one of the most surreal things I've ever experienced. It was like we drove back in time or something. About 3 miles from where I live, there's a small lake called Hoover Dam. It's not huge, but also not super small. East of the dam, there's a clearing called Walnut Creek Park, and it's surrounded by trees and woods. While driving around the area, me and 2 friends, decided to stop to find a good place to study for exams. While setting all of our stuff down, we heard a commotion of a girl screaming "don't," distorted voices, and silence until we approached the field again. We called the police, and there were inconclusive results. Ever since that night, we could return to the field, but we always felt uneasy or even straight afraid of what was there. We each have seen, heard, or felt things at the field, and we believe something more is going on there. Any noise heard from the field sounds odd. Rather than sound echoing off of the trees, it sounds as if there's a sound spiraling or waving up and down. Thinking about this gives me a feeling of dread deep in my throat and stomach. There was one night when a man wearing blue was standing on the side of the road while my friend was driving. According to her, the man grew until he was the height of the road sign, which is rather tall. On a road next to that, we were driving. I looked up to see an elderly man wearing a blue windbreaker, but when I mentioned him, she claimed not to have seen him and went pale but also sped up. I've never been one to believe in any of this, but it just doesn't feel like coexistence anymore. This was the same friend who had heard the don't, and she later shared her part of this story. Any comments? Okay, so I am about 27 years old, in Nashville, Tennessee. But this story took place about 12 years ago. Back when I was living in Missouri, my family and I were from a small town there that didn't have a population of more than 1,000 people. It was a closed society. Everybody knew everybody. You know your cliché, run-of-the-mill small town. But one Sunday morning, my brother and I were bored looking for something to do, so we both decided we'd ride our bikes down to our old elementary school. We were about halfway there when we noticed something odd. The path to our old school was straight ahead of us. To our left, there was a road that had never been there before. Keep in mind that the elementary school was less than a mile from the high school we attended, so we rode on this road almost daily. The road was different from the rest of the streets in the town. It was new and made of asphalt, unlike the other roads in our neighborhood. It's an ancient town, and along the sides of the streets, there were tall red trees that didn't grow in our town or nearby cities. So we decided to go on an adventure down the road and see where it led. After walking down the street for a while, we felt something weird that I cannot describe, but it was cold, not outside temperature, but our bodies were cold. The further we walked, we noticed a neighborhood with quite tall buildings in the back. My brother and I were shocked because our town was isolated from any big cities, at least an hour's drive to the nearest one. My brother insisted we keep going, but at that point, I was too scared to continue any longer. Finally, I convinced him to go back, and we did. We walked back and continued to the school. We spent about an hour or two there. We were on our way back when we came across where the mysterious road was supposed to be. There was nothing there. We were both beyond baffled and immediately rode back to our house and asked our parents if they knew anything about the new road built. They had no idea what we were talking about. We also asked about the new town nearby, and they looked at us like we were insane. My brother and I were both creeped out by this. We never saw the mysterious road again or the mysterious town. A few months ago, my parents and I were headed home after a night of shopping in a city about 45 minutes away from where they live. It was getting pretty late, and the entire drive back, we were discussing all of the strange occurrences we'd experienced. I actually brought up the glitch in the Matrix theory and some other general paranormal stuff, but soon the vibe of the conversation started making me uneasy. I was eager to get back to my parents and out of a dark car on a fairly empty road. Just as we got back into my hometown, as we were talking about some creepy phenomenon or another, something made me stop mid-sentence. I noticed something moving very quickly in front of the car. Here's where it gets difficult to describe. What appeared to be two black, stick-like legs, as if the bottom half of a stick man, ran quickly past the car. Everything in that moment seemed to slow down, and I entirely lost my train of thought. The area around the legs even almost seemed static-like and blurry. Neither my mom nor dad said anything immediately, so I shrugged it off as looking out in the night at a moving road for too long. But as I started my sentence again, my mom interrupted me. "What was that?" She genuinely sounded terrified. And I knew immediately what she was talking about. I basically screamed back, "The stick man?" And my mom began panicking. My dad seemed very confused and pulled over, and we looked around the area where we saw it run. My mom said that she saw an entire stick man run from one side of the road to another. Tall, lanky, almost 2D, just like a kid's drawing. When she calmed down, she started describing everything about what she saw, including how it walked. This was only about half a mile from their house, so we drove back, my dad still in a state of confusion and my mom and I nearly shaking. Ultimately, we all came to the conclusion that everything in that moment was very hazy, as if time had slowed down and we were seeing into another dimension. Why my mom and I saw it and my dad didn't, I still have no idea. Both of my parents are religious people and typically try to debunk stuff like this, but they both agree that there is no way what we saw wasn't otherworldly. We began researching and found that we weren't the only people to ever see the stick man. When my mom read about the way it moved, I saw her heart drop. It said something about claims of the thing galloping, which is exactly how she described it right after it happened. Normally, I am very interested in stuff like this, but I was so terrified that I just wanted to forget it happened. For some reason, something about the situation felt menacing. Whether this was a glitch, paranormal, or alien, I know that it was terrifying. Since then, I've been keenly aware of the odd things happening around me, and I have a few more occurrences that have happened since that night. But either way, I now have a big fear of driving alone at night in small towns. Stranded in the Wichita Mountains glitch. I don't know how to explain anything that happened. Glitch? Skinwalker? Meth heads? Lawton, okay, is in the middle of Nowhereville. No service. Around 7 p.m. Myself, the girlfriend, her brother, and her sister. On our way to a small diner in the area, this red Jeep started tailing us too close. We're all in our early to mid-20s, just cruising and having a good time. Basically, we weren't interested in being tailgated, so we turned on the blinker and started to pull off a little gravel turnout. The red Jeep floored it, forcing us to pull off the road too fast, sending the car flying into a ditch and getting us stuck on a drain pipe. We were all fine, but the car was stuck. The red Jeep stopped dead and backed up. The driver was an older man with his wife. His wife called us over to the window and said, "This area is called the Gap. At night, no one comes down this road. If you are stuck tonight, there are things out there. The natives know." Then they just ducking floored it, leaving us there. A truck came and offered a ride to my girlfriend and her brother to find a gas station or something up ahead. They leave, and I'm still there with her sister. 20 minutes later, a small red car pulls up and asks what happened. The woman was the same woman from the red Jeep, but the man was different. I asked if she was here earlier, and she looked at me like I was crazy. The man said he had a chain back at his house, and the woman looked at me, winked, and said, "I'll be right back." They drove off. GF and brothers experience. They get in the truck and start to head deeper into the Gap to find service and a chain to pull our car out. The guy starts telling her all about how people shouldn't be trusted nowadays. Creepy ass shit like that. Saying the area isn't safe for us. They do, however, find a place to get service and try to call a tow. Meanwhile, another man in a truck pulled up, didn't say a single word, hooked up a chain, pulled us out, and left. As soon as my girl and her brother got back, we booked it the duck out of there. I guess when you're in Lawton, mind the gap. My family relocated to the countryside around a year ago, moving from Chicago into our old summer cottage that we'd owned a few years prior that we regularly visited on weekends. We renovated it. Here are a few weird or strange experiences I have had. Next to my neighborhood, there is a campground just down the main road, and next to it is the foundation for an unfinished abandoned hospital that the town lost funding for its construction back in the 1960s. Even further down the road, there is a small cemetery and church. Services haven't been held in the church since at least the 1990s, but the graves are in good condition. During the day, you can find a few rednecks drinking beer and stuff, but it's freaky at night. Not freaky in the sense of it being spooky, more like something is truly offsetting about it, and the abandoned hospital is completely fine. A few months ago, my siblings and I went on a golf cart ride to the cemetery because we were bored and it was late at night, and I kept getting this horrible feeling that something was very, very wrong. Something, not a physical being, was screaming at us to leave. Then we noticed there was no sound of wildlife at all, which made them kind of uneasy, but I was freaking out. Then we heard whistling out of nowhere, directly in our ears, almost like someone was directly whistling into them. No one goes to the cemetery at night. This made them start panicking and made me almost pass out, and needless to say, we drove back home as fast as we could, and we all fell asleep on the couch. Later that night, I had a horrible sleep paralysis episode, and I later came to find out that my mom, who knew nothing about our late night activities, also had a sleep paralysis episode that night. We never drove past the graveyard ever again, even during the day. Another one I have is one that I experienced with two of my friends, Sam and Haley, and we were going to visit another friend, Maddie. This happened around 3 years ago. She lived at the end of a long stretch of dirt road with about 2 to 3 houses on it, and Sam lived in town, just a few miles away. The road was on the outskirts of town, not the same one I lived in, but it was nearby. I wouldn't even consider it a town, since all it had was literally just a post office and a convenience store. The plan was that we were going to walk down that road, visit Maddie, walk back to Sam's house, and spend the night. Maddie lived with her abusive dad, and he would never let us spend the night, and it was already a stretch visiting her, but we decided to anyway. We hung out, and after a few hours, Maddie's dad told us to leave, so we did. It was extremely dark out, and we were already kind of put off. We started walking, and all of us slowly began to feel this ever-pervasive sense that something was watching us. Then we heard whispers mixed with troubled breathing and footsteps. It sounded like something was dragging along the road, and there were multiple of them. We'd all fling our heads back, but there'd be nothing, and it'd stop for a while but would come back even louder, almost to the point where it was literally right behind us. We began to feel this sense of pure, raw malice. I don't remember what the time was, but we felt that if we didn't get off that road within 5 minutes, something horrible would happen, so we all started running as fast as we could. The footsteps began to turn into sprinting and breathing, and there were more of them, but we quickly made it back into town and walked to Sam's. The rest of the night at Sam's was uneventful. Another thing about that road was that it always felt off, even during the daytime. I had been to Maddie's house before, a couple of times, and explored the woods around her house as well. The road was always littered with dead animals, either skinned or with a big gash in the middle. There'd be sections of the forest that felt extremely off. We found 3 skinned rabbits lying in the middle of a clearing in the woods in a circle of rocks. Haley, Sam, and I never went to Maddie's house again, but we still talked to each other, and Maddie moved around 5 months after that. I looked up the town that both of them lived in or still live in, and the first thing that popped up were numerous articles about 2 girls being murdered by a man near the abandoned train tracks around the town. I don't know if the entities drove the man to do it, if they were already attached to the town before it took place, or if the entities appeared afterwards. Over the summer of 2020, my cousin, his friend, and I were driving back home from my cousin's girlfriend's. I remember it so vividly. We were driving back at night, I think it was about midnight, and there was a man with a bike. I'm in a big city, so it's not anything out of the ordinary to see at least one person walking that late or biking or whatever. I remember seeing the man just standing there without a face. He had a white helmet, and he was white, and he was wearing a red cyclist outfit, but there was literally nothing on his face. He was facing the car. We were at a stoplight, and I was in the back seat closest to the sidewalk where the man was. We were at the stoplight for about a minute or so, and I was just telling my cousin and his friend to look because the man was just standing there doing nothing. He wasn't at a bus stop or anything, and he wasn't on his phone, so it was just out of the ordinary to see someone stand so still like that and not move. The man was also not using the crosswalk, he was just standing there and didn't turn his head or make any sort of movement. It is definitely the weirdest thing I have ever seen. I know what I saw, and my eyes are pretty good even in the dark, so I was creeped out. I've never seen anything like it again, and I wouldn't want to. I've had paranormal things happen to me, like seeing shadow people and whatnot, but nothing like this, and I also have never seen anything that wasn't at home or at another person's house. It was just creepy. It's made me question myself, but I swear to God I know what I saw. It kind of felt like a glitch in the Matrix and has made me think and wonder a lot ever since I saw him. This story I'm going to tell took place in 2010. I was living in Hamilton, Montana, with my current girlfriend. It was late at night, and my friend and I would always go for a drive. We parked in an empty parking lot outside of a gym that was on the outskirts of town. My friend had his medical marijuana card, and he would smoke while we talked about random shit. We worked together. Workplace drama was usually the topic of discussion. After we were done hanging out, I started my car to head back into town. We started heading towards the outlet to take a right onto the main street. I was about 50 feet away from the outlet when I decided the mood called for some loud music. The genre was rap, and I can't, for the life of me, remember the song that was playing right at that moment. To give you an idea of what our field of view was, the outlet had 2 white fences on each side that spanned the property. It was one of those fences that had 2 logs with spaces in between them, so vision was partially blocked on the right and left sides. Granted, it was pretty damn dark. That is when SHT hit the fan. Out of the corner of my eye, I see what appeared to be a dusty brown ball of plastic or garbage that rolled into view from the other side of the right fence. We were driving closer as this was happening, but as soon as I got a better look, I knew this was not a piece of garbage blowing in the wind. I immediately realized it was a winged, flesh-like creature that appeared to have crash-landed during flight. I thought my eyes were deceiving me, and I immediately turned to my friend, who let out one of the most blood-curdling screams I have heard in my entire life. I kept looking at him and looking back at this thing. My friend was so scared that he flew his legs into the air, up against the passenger window and windscreen, as if that would shield him from this creature we were approaching. I kept repeating, "What is that? What is that?" As soon as the creature came to its senses, it planted its feet and took off, flying in the opposite direction of my car. At this point, I stopped the car, and all I remember is heavy breathing from both my friend and me, from the adrenaline, as we watched the silhouette of this thing fly away. The wingspan of this creature was at least 6 to 8 feet wide. It seemed to have webbing like a bat, no feathers. We watched it until it was not visible, which took a good while. Montana still has a decent amount of light pollution, and we could see the contrast of this creature in the sky for 2 to 3 minutes before it disappeared. I remember my friend telling me, "Please just take me home." We took off and headed back into town. I just kept asking, "What was that? What was that?" I don't think there were more than a few words spoken between us at that point. I just kept asking, "What was that? What was that?" He would respond, "I don't ducking know, man." I dropped him off. I went home and told my girlfriend, who was laughing at how animated and serious I was when I told her what happened. The next day, I woke up and immediately called him. I asked him, "What did you see?" I wanted him to tell me first so that what I had to say did not influence his recollection of this creature. He told me, it was a flesh-like creature, it was not a bird, there were no feathers. I asked him, "What color was it?" He told me, "Brownish," and I said, "Sort of gray?" He said, "OMG, yes." I no longer talk to this friend, as he slipped into an unfortunate issue with prescription pills. I wish we still had a friendship, as I have wanted to talk to him about this event since it happened. We both saw the exact same thing, we both nearly shit our pants. I am the type of person who laughs in the face of ghostly or paranormal stuff. If I don't see it, I don't believe it. I still, to this day, cannot explain what I saw. I still get chills when thinking about my friend screaming. The way I describe this thing is as a gigantic bat or humanoid with wings. There was not one feather on this flying creature. I mention this because anyone I tell this story to tells me I probably saw a bird of some sort. I remember this creature being slightly hairy. The occurrence is from last Thursday, June 17, 2016. I'm not sure if it's just pranksters or something else, but the following is what I got. Last night, around 10:50 p.m., George was driving home and experienced something really creepy. He was driving along Highway 22, just before Honorable Geneva, when he saw a strange, tall man, dressed all in black, step out from the ditch onto the side of the highway. As George passed him, the man stepped out behind his car, into the middle of his lane, and stopped and watched him drive off. As George described, the man cocked his head to the side while he watched him drive away, and his arms weren't down against his sides, more curved as if he were holding basketballs under his wrists against his hips. Maybe to appear stronger in stature, he said his face was black too. Maybe he painted a mask, but he could not make out facial features. A bit shaken, he continued driving towards home when a second man, clothed the same way and with the same demeanor, stepped out from the ditch just before Sweetland Road. At this point, George floored the gas and sped home. When he came in the door, he was distraught. Listening to him tell me about his encounter scared me. I reported the men to the sheriff. Alan took George back out to look for the men, but he never saw them again. The sheriff called and asked to meet with George about this in the last month. There have been sightings of the same thing near Fairport. I am writing this because I want to warn all of you who live along the highway or drive along 22 at night to keep a lookout. I'm not sure what they are up to, but it's creepy. The other interesting thing is that I have a friend who told me a friend of hers had been driving a road between Iowa City and Solon, some years ago, at night and had seen something standing alongside the road on the shoulder. Whatever she had seen had been big and had wings, and scaring her, she had driven on past fast. Except about 3 to 4 miles down the road, she looked up and saw the exact same creature standing again on the side of the road, also with wings, looking exactly like the first. It seems too coincidental to have that kind of happening in two areas around one place. If it's not a hoax, it's definitely creepy. I've been searching for information about this since I saw it in the summer of 2005. I've scoured reports of the area but come up with nothing, so I finally decided to share them here in the hope someone could shed some light on them. I was driving along a quiet road in Devon on a really hot summer's afternoon with my then partner when we saw something really strange at the side of the road ahead of us, probably about 10 to 15 meters away. We were coming towards a bend in the road, and there was an entrance to a cemetery with gates that were open. We could clearly see a tall, probably 7-foot, creature near the gates of the cemetery. As we looked at the creature, it walked through the gates and out of sight. Now to describe its appearance, on first confused glance, we were trying to work out what it was, and the nearest we could come was some sort of stocky bird wearing a cloak. I know this sounds mad. It had its head down and appeared to have some kind of elongated face, which we recognized as being beak-like at this point. The most striking thing was that it was walking on stocky, bird-like legs with those inverted joints. Sorry, I don't know the correct term for this. Anyway, we reached the gate and pulled over. We were both just really confused and didn't even know how to describe what we'd seen. We went through the gates of the cemetery, and there was absolutely nothing to be seen. It's a small village cemetery, there was nowhere at all for it to disappear to. Not too long afterwards, I happened to read an account of a lizard sighting that seemed eerily similar in appearance and movement to this creature. The thing we had mistaken for a cloak could have been wings. I live in southeastern Georgia, and occasionally while driving at night, I've seen these fairly tall, around 6'2" with knees slightly bent, emaciated creatures with skin that looks like it was charred on the grill, leaving it covered in oil and black grit or flecks. I can't remember the face because the images of the rake look close enough to replace it in my memory. It seems to mildly match the description of crawlers, but I've only ever seen them bipedal. I've seen these creatures 3 times, and these sightings are the only times I've felt real fear. I've only seen them while driving and at night. The most notable time was the first one. While I was driving friends home with a full car, I found a corner to see what I'd just described, standing in the road directly in front of my car. Understandably freaked out, I blinked my eyes as a reflex as I hit the brakes. When my eyes opened, we'd passed right through, and it was nowhere to be seen. I wasn't the only one to see it, and after a second of disbelief, the second we mentioned this thing out loud, I got an extreme feeling that we were being followed, doing 80, on winding back roads. I figured there wasn't much else to do as I had to get to a pair of siblings home in minutes as they had a strict curfew, and we were already late. As we reached about 4/5 ths of the way there, the feeling of danger went from behind me to in front of me, and sure enough, there was a limping munchkin cat or kitten. Its legs were barely 3 inches long, walking down the street parallel to the yellow line, exactly where my front left tire would have been. I managed to swerve out of the way, as the cat just kept walking without change, and it was too dark to see if it moved after we passed. Before that night, I had never had a problem with any animal in front of my car while driving for almost a year without it happening, but since then, almost 3 years later, I have had animals almost commit suicide every week. And occasionally I feel the feeling again, usually when I drive the same roads, as if I'm being followed again. The second encounter was the scariest. I was again driving someone home in the same area as the other 2. I didn't know him that well, but people knew where I was going. Halfway there, I could already feel that I was being followed, but I had gotten used to that. I had never been to those parts of the woods before, but as soon as I got close enough, just being in that area gave me the only time I had ever felt true fear for my life, as if just the consciousness of the woods outmatched the human one. It felt like a hive mind. After conveying this to my passenger, who confirmed that at night there have been scary occurrences, without elaborating much, I pull into his driveway, pulling up to his door as close as I can, as his house is in a very wooded yard and I didn't want him to walk too far. He made it inside, but as I was backing up to leave, as I felt the initial creature looking at me from behind me, I saw in front of me a second one bigger than the first one I saw running behind a stand-up shelter, basically a roof with no walls, and it was fast, even with my adrenaline pumping. It seemed to be going 25 to 30 miles per hour. Suddenly, the feeling of danger rose to the point where I felt I was in immediate danger. And there were more than those 2. I tore through his dirt driveway and back onto the dirt road entrance. As soon as I turned out of the driveway, a dog jumped from a completely brush-covered ledge 5 feet above the road. There was a house in the direction it came from, but it had a fence around it, and I don't think even a toddler could have fit through those vines, and this dog was 3 feet 5 inches. It didn't chase my car or anything. It stood in the center of the road and barked at my car. As I was already too close to it to stop, I had to swerve around it. As I passed it, it just stared without barking, but I didn't dare look at it for more than an instant. I don't think I came to a full stop the whole way home, which was a good 20 minutes away. Thankfully, the third time was from very far away. I just turned my brights on a curve again after dropping a friend off and saw the same shape again, 1,200 feet off, but instead of a charred gray, this one was bright white. It was too quick to see anything else. This time maybe 3 to 6 miles away from the other 2 miles apart. I have seen multiple animals that walk along the road as I pass, some disfigured and some moving slower than they should. I've even run across scattered bones occasionally. The worst was on the way to church when I came to the end of one road to turn onto another. On the route I always take, there were 4 to 7 dead birds laying around the white line all across the right lane, just at the stop sign, so that you have to enter the left lane to go around them. On my way back 3 hours later, at 8 at night, they were all gone, no trace of blood or anything. In a discussion with a friend during the first encounter, we settled on calling it a skinwalker due to the connection with the kitten and the fact that the aggressive behavior only started once we spoke about it. This story is about 5 years old now, give or take a few months. For a while, I thought maybe I had dreamed it or something, but my mom corroborated my story. I was 18 at the time, and it was my first Thanksgiving that I wasn't in school. My mom and I were taking our usual 7-hour trip up north. On holidays like this, It was more like 9 hours, to our family in New Jersey for the holiday. We used to live up there, and since moving down south, we have made, and still make, the trip up north about 4 or 5 times a year. Needless to say, we are abundantly familiar with the interstate. We're abundantly familiar with the entire route, to be honest. The way we always go is by taking Route 64 to 295 before getting on the interstate, the beautiful I-95. It stinks, it is always filled with traffic, so naturally, the two of us leave at ungodly hours in the morning. This doesn't bug either of us, really, because we both wake up early anyway. So, this trip started off like any other. We were out the door by 6:15, had our Chick-fil-A in hand by 6:30, and were filled up on gas and on the road by 7 or so. The first part of the trip was fine. We put on music, talked about random stuff, and gossiped as mothers and daughters do. By the time we got to the 295 exit, it was still fairly early, but both of us were wide awake. She took the exit, and we were set. The road looked as it always did, and nothing was out of the ordinary. After a few minutes of driving, though, something felt very wrong. Gone were the multiple lanes of the highway. We were now on what looked to be a country road. It cut through a cornfield and only had one lane of traffic in either direction. We were, as far as either of us could see, the only ones driving on that stretch of road. There was a little farmhouse on our right side, but that's about all. My mom and I were both really taken aback because we had just been on the highway. Neither of us had noticed any exits, nor had my mom gotten off at the wrong one. We had been on 295, and then suddenly we weren't. My mom tried to rationalize it at first, saying that she probably wasn't paying attention because she had a bit of a headache forming and had just gotten off at the wrong exit. At the time, I agreed with her, but something felt very, very off, and suddenly the Chick-fil-A breakfast wasn't sitting so well anymore. There weren't any signs for directions, only a few speed limit signs as we kept going. When I looked at the dashboard clock, too, only a minute or so had gone by. By the looks of it, we were in the middle of nowhere, Virginia. Time for me didn't seem to match up, but I just felt weird and dizzy at that point. My mom decided to keep driving forward. I don't know why she didn't just K-turn so we could go back, but she's always been the one to prefer to get actual directions. We didn't have cell service, either, so that may have been why. That's pretty normal for rural VA, though. I work on a haunted farm during the Halloween season, so I'm pretty used to spotty reception. Cornstalks are not cell towers. Well, we kept on driving, and after maybe 15 minutes, we came to what I guess was this census-designated place's idea of a town. By this, I mean there was a service station and a church. We stopped the car, they filled us up, and my mom asked for directions. The guys were pretty nice, your typical laid-back Southerners. They did tease my mom for her New York accent, though. When we explained that we'd gotten turned around coming off of 295, they looked really surprised. The younger of the two guys said that, coming from the direction we had, we were driving towards 295N, not away from it. That really threw us for a loop. They asked if we'd ever done this trip before, if we were new to Virginia, etc., and were very shocked when we said yes. We all got quiet after that, and my mom and I got back in our car and drove another 20 minutes to get back on the highway. Once we were back en route, that pit in my stomach went away. Neither of us really talked any more about it, and we didn't mention it to our family once we got to Jersey. I've thought about this experience a lot since it happened, though. I tried to rationalize it, but the more I think about it, the weirder it gets. Sure, plenty of people make driving mistakes when they're tired, but my mom and I had both had our coffee well before this happened. What really trips me up is how we were driving towards 295 and not away from it, and how far away from the exit we were on that country road. That, and how little time had passed between being on the interstate and not being on the interstate. While driving my husband to work recently, he noticed what appeared to be a very strange man staring at us. It was after 4 p.m., PST, it was daylight as we were waiting for the light at an intersection. We were the first car to stop at the light. As the traffic was going by on the main highway, my husband happened to notice the driver of a red truck glancing in our direction. He appeared to be an older gentleman, wearing a pair of oversized, or aviator-style, dark sunglasses. As the man turned to look at us more intently, his head morphed into a gray-colored, very flat face. Additionally, he kept his gaze riveted on us, even though he was traveling through the intersection at approximately 55 miles per hour. He finally turned his head slowly forward when he could no longer see us clearly. My husband was quite taken aback by this unnerving sighting. A man seems to have lost his human appearance and is taking on one that can be likened to an alien. My husband tried to avoid looking at cars for a few days after this. I personally did not see this person, And I have to say that I am glad. I am equally disturbed by a very strange being taking notice of us. So anyway, my friend, or should I say ex, always rings me when he is drunk, so last night he rang me at 3 a.m. After a bit of persuasion and worrying about his drunken state, I went to pick him up. It was very dark and the roads were empty. Anyway, driving back about 4 a.m., he fell asleep, but he kept leaning over on me, and I kept pushing him off. I was struggling to change my gears and drive properly. I drove down this winding road where my old school is, and there is lots of land, like big fields. As I was driving, I saw this black Silety driving a pedal bike crossing in front of me. It was all black, and it was going pretty fast. I slammed on. I panicked. I thought it was a cyclist. It drove off really fast, then vanished. It was like hovering above the road. I was froze stiff. My friend was like, "What is going on?" Because I slammed on so much. He nearly went through the windscreen. Then I just screamed, "OMFG, did you see that ghost?" The hairs on my neck stood up. I started to cry. I was so freaked out. He was scared but said he didn't see anything, so I was trembling while driving home. I was driving quite slowly. After about 5 or 10 minutes, we get off this weird road. As I turn right to turn off, an actual man on a bike with a high visibility jacket is turning up the scary winding road. I immediately felt scared for him. I was so freaked out. I've been thinking about it all day and wondering if it was a warning. Would something bad have happened if I didn't slam on and my friend didn't wake up? Would I have hit this cyclist? It was really bizarre. I told my friend about it this morning, and he just thought it was funny. I wonder what the hell it was. I still have chills. I was hoping after I told my story that maybe one of you knew about this place. It kept me up all night trying to find this creepy-ass hamlet or village that 4 of us may have stumbled upon. So we're camping in BC with my family, my sister's boyfriend, and a friend of mine, which was out by Lake Kookanusa, literally a stone's throw from the US border. One day, we decided to go to a little town that has a farmer's market. The drive was around 30 to 45 minutes long, and that part of the day was completely normal. I can't remember why we borrowed my dad's truck, but I believe it was to find a convenience store, drink, or explore the roads a bit while they were doing their thing. I was driving, with my friend in the passenger seat and my sister and her boyfriend in the back seat. After something like 15 to 20 minutes, it wasn't far away from the town where the market was, through some winding, tree-lined roads, we come across this village or hamlet. So we pull into the convenience store and get out of the truck. In the field directly behind the store, there's some sort of event going on. We go inside this convenience store, and my sister asks to use the washroom. She goes to the back, and I start browsing. This is where my gut is telling me something ain't right about this situation. There's literally nothing new for sale except liquor. Just boxes and boxes of old, dusty food. Literally KD from the 70s and 80s. The shelves weren't dusted, and it was just strange to me that this convenience store literally had nothing but booze and this old shit on the shelves. I noted this to my friend, and she was also a little weirded out until my sister came back from the bathroom white as a ghost and said we should leave. As we're exiting the store, everyone at this event is looking at us. I remember this so clearly because all of us got freaked out, hopped in the truck, and headed for the town where the rest of us were checking behind us to see if we were being followed. This is when my sister tells us that while she headed back to the bathroom, there was some fat dude sitting in his tighty whities just watching her as she went into the bathroom, which was apparently disgusting as the toilet was never cleaned and there were mushrooms growing out of the tub like some dilapidated trap house. We got back to the town, and my dad laughed at how freaked out we were. Anyway, I'm hoping someone could shed some light on where this town is because I have combed the area and have yet to find anything that looks like the village. The campground was by Newgate, BC, and the town and village were somewhere in the area. This was in the Kootenays. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to go on a road trip at night. I bought some food and decided we were going to go to a scary deserted place and step out of the car to eat it. After driving for a long while, we found a scary spot with old abandoned houses and no civilization. We got lucky as there was one street light across miles, so we decided to park the car there, and as we did, we got out of the car. Keep in mind that there were a few abandoned houses and then forests on both sides of the road. It was really dark, but the moon was out there that day. We were supposed to walk a few meters and check out the place, but it was so deserted that we just got out of the car and stood right beside it. The plan was no matter what happens, no one gets back in the car unless we got bored. As I'm eating my candy, I see an unknown figure looking right at me, standing in the middle of the road, trees on both sides. I did not stare right at the figure because I didn't want him to know that I saw him. So I glanced once, saw him, glanced a second time, yep, still there, glanced a third time, okay, this is real and I'm not tripping. I got in the car so fast, and one of my friends saw it too. We just bolted. What do you think? It's still a mystery to me. So I want to preface this by saying this is a true story, and the events I'm going to describe happened on a couple different occasions. A friend and I had been driving home from shopping when she started to feel sick. Now it was nighttime at this point and dark, and we're on a rural, poorly lit highway, still about 45 minutes from home, but she had started to get really nauseous and asked if we could pull over, so I did. I pulled over at the nearest turnout, which happened to be next to a huge field with a small house in the distance. Now I'm shitting myself the second I pull over because I've seen enough horror movies to be paranoid about these kinds of places, but she bails out of the car and starts walking towards the field, heaving. I'm sitting there, kind of looking around and keeping my eye on her, when she asks me for a bag for the rest of the car ride home. I oblige and get out of the car, go to the trunk, and start to dump out one of the grocery bags. Now what's weird is that there should have been a lot more noise. Yes, it's dark, and there aren't many passing cars, but there are no dogs barking, no crickets, nothing. I finish with the grocery bag and I'm just standing at the trunk, watching her. She's in front of the field, there's also a shallow ditch in front of her, full of water, which I remember being odd because it hadn't rained in a while. There was also an orchard to her left. I remember her looking down at the water and then yelling to me, "Did you hear that? We need to go. Like now." We both bolt back to the car, lock the doors, and drive off. What she heard was a loud shriek and a cry. And it was getting closer and closer to us. We had both felt something watching us, but we never saw anything. A few nights later, in a completely different place, we were having a bonfire. It was me, her, and her sister outside by the bonfire. Now it's summer, and we're talking 12 to 1 o'clock. We were all having a good time. I was laughing, joking around, listening to music, and dancing when, all of a sudden, the vibe just kind of changed. We all got uneasy. My friend and her sister looked at each other, and were like, do you feel that? And if we all got the sense that we were being watched, we ran back to the house so fast. We talked about it when we got there. Maybe it was the same thing she heard that night at the field. She was worried it had followed us home somehow. That's when she tells her sister about the sound she heard. Her sister's eyes got wide, and she began to tell her about the other night, when she also heard a noise like that. She said it was so loud that it woke her and her dad up. She thought it was a baby crying and wailing or an animal, and she wrote it off. We're not really sure what it is or was. I just know that I've never felt that uneasy before. It was a scary feeling. She thought I wouldn't believe her when she began telling me, but I do. It's crazy and unexplainable, but I swear to God that there was something out there those nights. It can't be a coincidence either, can it? That 2 separate nights, at completely different locations, that they heard this thing? My friend was also worried because it seems that this thing keeps getting closer and closer. Let me know if you've had any encounters like this. Or have you heard anything that you think sounds like what I've described? This happened in California, in the mountains. This story happened to my parents sometime between 1994 and 1997. One hot summer day, my parents decided they wanted to go to the local drive-in to catch a movie. They called their friends, a couple who I'll call Martin and Jessica, to see if they wanted to come along. They said they would love to go, so my parents left to go pick them up. On their way to pick Martin and Jessica up, my parents spotted a man on a street corner. He was dressed in a long black trench coat, black pants, black boots, and a black fedora-type hat. This was very odd considering it was easily the hottest day of the summer and most people in the area were walking around shirtless, t-shirts, and shorts. He was staring at my parents in their car with an expression my mother could only describe as evil. He was smiling in an alarming way, and his head followed the car as it passed by. Out of all the cars driving by, he decided to stare at my parents, and he followed the car with his gaze. My parents thought it was very odd, as he was just focusing on them and no one else, and due to the way he was dressed. Also, no one else who happened to be walking on the same sidewalk as the man seemed to notice him. It just came off as bizarre. My parents arrived at Martin and Jessica's house and picked them up. They told them about the man, joking that he was probably some drug dealer or homeless person, as he seemed very out of place in the rural area. So they are now on their way to the drive-in. To get to the local drive-in, you have to pass through the downtown area of my city and turn off onto a highway that takes you to the local university. The drive-in is on the side of said highway, before you reach the university. Anyway, as they turn into the downtown area, they notice the same man, wearing the same clothes, having the same evil smile, staring at them, and no other car. My parents tell Martin and Jessica that it's the man they saw earlier, and everyone gets a little creeped out. There's no way he could have walked that far from when they first saw him, but my parents did stop to pick up Martin and Jessica, so he could have gotten a drive or cab to where he was standing downtown. They keep driving and turn down a street about 30 seconds after they just saw him, and when they turn the corner down the street, there he is. The same man. Same grin. I am still focused on just my parents. Everyone starts freaking out because it's impossible for him to be there. They just passed him, not even a minute earlier. They all agree that something's not right, but decide to keep going. They pass by the local Cineplex, movie theaters, and see him standing by an intersection. They can't believe their eyes because he is there again, 45 seconds after seeing him on the same road. Martin and Jessica watch from the back seat of the car to make sure that he is still there, which he is. They decide to keep an eye on him to make sure he isn't getting picked up by anyone and somehow dropped off in different locations at an unbelievable speed. Just as my parents' car is driving up the hill, which leads to the turnoff onto the highway, the man finally fades from Martin and Jessica's sight, and they turn back around. When the car reaches the top of the hill, the man is standing on the sidewalk, just staring and smiling. Everyone starts screaming, and they turn the car around and speed back to Martin and Jessica's house. To this day, the story still freaks them out, and they have no idea who or what he was. They never saw that man again. Any idea of what or who that could be? A few years ago, on Halloween night, my security company was scheduled for a special event in one of our patrol areas. The old North End neighborhoods in Colorado Springs are 89 square blocks of historic homes dating as far back as the 1880s. On Tejon Street, every year, the community organizers hold a big trick-or-treating event. Old spooky houses, killer yard decorations, great costumes, it's truly a great outing. I was scheduled for the 8 hours that night from 4 p.m. to midnight because I was the only officer with an available marked company cruiser. The first several hours were pretty normal, helping CSPD locate lost kids for their parents, drunk college kids from the nearby campus, or drunk dads staggering around with their kids, and making sure no fights broke out. It wasn't until after 10 p.m. that the truly bizarre began to take place. For Halloween in Colorado Springs, it was surprisingly mild out, so I decided to patrol mostly on foot, just moving my car to a different zone every hour to an hour and a half. Around 10:15, a small group of teens decided to try to prank me while driving to my next zone. This wasn't a good idea on their part. As soon as 2 of them started charging my cruiser, waving axes over their heads, I slammed into the park and came out drawn on them. They immediately decided to throw the axes down. One made a plastic thud, and the other made a metallic clanking. After both were successfully detained and I was on the phone with the parents of one of the kids, I noticed from my peripheral that a lumbering figure with reddish-orange eyes was glaring from the shadows of an alleyway. Assuming it was another pranking teen, I shouted, "It's late, kid. Head home." After a few seconds more of glaring, the figure turned and disappeared deeper into that alley. Just before 10:45, I was finishing up with the boys' parents. They spent some time chastising them on how stupid they were for doing the scary clown prank and how they were lucky nothing worse happened or them getting arrested by PD. The boys left in their parents' cars, and I headed to the fire station to use their bathroom. While there, after using the head, one of the firefighters was telling me, since I was on foot, to mostly look out for Ouija boards that had been set on fire in the alleys throughout the old North End. I thought he was joking as he handed me a Dr. Pepper, but then it followed that they had already responded to 3 incidents in a 4-block area. I then went up to the elementary school and parked. I figured I'd check the alleyway heading south from the school drop-off all the way down to the community border. Not before I hit the mouth of the first cross street, a simmering board was found with the planchet burning standing straight. While on the phone with the firehouse giving the location, I saw the figure from before, but it was slightly clearer. I acted like I didn't see him while I was still on the phone so I could examine him. He stood tall, maybe 6.5 feet tall. A pale face with long sideburns, slicked back dark brown hair, and a jagged overbite. Most importantly of all, the eyes gave a glimpse of an orange-red glow. Like a raccoon or cat's eyes when light reflects off of them. I told the station house that nothing was close enough to start a secondary fire and gave the location once more. As I got off the phone, I shouted to the person, "Hey, do you know anything about this?" The figure began fleeing down the alleyway. In quick pursuit, I followed. Central, show me in pursuit of a possible arsonist. Have PD meet at San Miguel at the mouth of the southbound alleyway. I chased and ordered the individual to stop, trying to spot him with my light. But I couldn't keep pace. He was clearing potholes, curbs, and hazards like they were nothing. He then suddenly stopped dead and turned. With an unnerving smile, he stared at me, almost menacingly. I pulled my tail, as I didn't know what he was about to do. And as my laser sight found his chest as I was staggering to find my breath, he gave out a horrid hiss. I started to see the red and blue code lights of the CSPD police cars behind me. Instantly, a flash coming from this creep blinded me, and I lost sight. I looked back, and he was gone. The police slid to a stop and popped out around me, seeing the flash too. Some asked where the guy went, and the other one asked why I fired my gun. I showed that my taser was in my hand and wasn't discharged. The other 2 cops backed me, saying they saw someone, and then he disappeared. But one didn't believe any of us. The 4 police cars then searched the entire Old North End and surrounding neighborhoods. No one matching what I saw was seen. Before midnight, I went back to the firehouse to see if they had headache pills or something like that. While sitting in their lounge area, one of the firefighters told me something rather odd. On all the burned spirit boards, they found the only parts that were untouched with flame or damage, the moon symbol and the goodbye. So I'm still wondering if what I chased was a ghoul, spirit, demon, or prankster. Either way, I don't tend to walk down any of the Old North End neighborhood alleyways around Halloween unless absolutely necessary. A couple months ago, I was driving to a doctor's appointment for my annual physical. I've driven to this same office multiple times. I've had the same doctor for years. It's about 10 minutes from my house, and the route is just a simple rural/suburban 2-lane road the whole way there. It's on the corner of a 2-lane road and a busy 6-lane street. I left 20 minutes before the appointment so I could check in. Since I've gone this route so many times, I'm kind of on autopilot, and it took me a while to realize that it was taking longer than expected to get there, but I'm not sure why. I'm thinking it should be about 3 more stoplights, and I should be there in a few minutes. I keep an eye on the school, which indicates the office is up ahead. But then, as I'm driving, I count 4 stoplights, then 5, then 6, then 7. I'm disoriented, and all the houses look the same. I think maybe I passed the office, but that doesn't make sense because it's on a busy 6-lane road. I would have noticed. I keep driving. I'm almost in tears because I realize I'm going to be late, and I don't know why. The route is literally the same road the whole way there. I haven't made any turns. How can I be lost? I'm so confused. The area looks familiar, but I feel like I'm driving past the same houses and the same stoplights over and over again. I haven't seen the school on my right, which indicates the office is coming up. Finally, I pull over into a church parking lot and pull up a map on my phone. I feel ridiculous needing to use the map. But the map indicates I'm on the right street. It says I haven't passed the office. The office is just up the road. This doesn't make any sense because I haven't seen the school or the huge 6-lane road yet. And I've been driving for 20 minutes. There was no traffic. The roads are empty. I literally haven't seen a single car for miles. I pull out of the church parking lot, and the school is literally right next to the church, and the bus 6-lane road is right there beyond the school. It was not there when I pulled into the church parking lot. I would have seen it.